Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kelly, your host. Jimmy Akin's with us both hours today, and it's Ask Me Anything. And I guess you could tell because, well, if you could see what I see, there's only one line open. We're 4 seconds into the show, and there's only one line open. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you the number if you want that line, 888-318-7884. It's a narrow set of categories when Jimmy's here. It's anything. You can talk about anything. 888-318-7884. If you can narrow it down to anything, you are welcome. Actually, you know, if it's sports ball, Jimmy's not so big on the sports ball. But anything else, 888-318-7884. If you're a Catholic person, you got questions about your Catholic faith, you're welcome. If you're not a Catholic and you've got questions about the Catholic faith, you're welcome. And if you're any kind of human and you just got a question you want to ask Jimmy Akin, you're also welcome. 888-318-7884. Jimmy is the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, an exciting and sometimes spooky, sometimes just fascinating corner of the podcasting and internet world. You can find it at mysterious.fm. You can find it at Jimmy's YouTube spot, or you can just type in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and your computer will find it for you. Jimmy's also senior apologist here, author of a whole bunch of books, and probably the most likely person for us to call if somebody cancels on this show, because he almost always says yes to us. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, how's it going, Si?
Really good. Really very, very good. Today is Thursday, so I can ask what's dropping tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
It's going to be part 2 of our look at the Vatican's new norms for discerning supernatural apparitions and other supernatural events. Last week, we covered the prefatory letter that Cardinal Fernandez had in the document, and this time we're going to be looking at the norms themselves and giving examples. Also, as a special bonus feature for this episode, I was looking at the video, and if you watch the video version, you're going to see a lot of my sister's dog. Because I was dog sitting when we recorded it, and in this episode, she's in the background playing, and with toys and stuff. She's shaking them around, because she's a fierce little dog, and at one point she comes up to me and stands up on the side of the chair and puts her arms up on me to get my attention and stuff like that.
No, a guest star. You've got a guest star featuring.
Yeah.
She should get a featuring credit on there. Again, 888-318-7884, the number. The lines do stay full when Jimmy is our guest, but if you keep working it, you could probably get through and get your question asked and answered. We'll start today with Manny in Sacramento, California, watching on YouTube. Manny, welcome. Go ahead and start us off with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Thank you very much. My question is, how can we respond to Mormons, and I suppose Oneness Pentecostals use this also? They say Ephesians 4:11 and 1 Corinthians 12:28 tell us that one of the marks of the true church is that it must have modern-day apostles. So how can we respond?
Well, in the first place, it doesn't say that the true church must have apostles. The true church did have apostles in the first century, but there's nothing in these verses that say that's going to always be the case. In fact, there is evidence against this in the case of, given the fact that St. Paul indicates one of the criteria for being an apostle, and this is different than being one of the 12. For the 12, there were additional requirements, but one of the requirements for being an apostle is having seen the Lord. At one point he says, "Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen the Lord?" And he's referring to his commissioning by Jesus back in Acts chapter 9. So with one of the criteria being you have to have seen the Lord, well, if the church is going to exist past the apostolic age, then you're not going to have more folks who have seen the Lord unless Jesus chooses to continue to appear to them the way he appeared to St. Paul. And the evidence of history is that didn't happen. So you find, for example, Clement of Rome writing at the end of the apostolic age, talking about how they passed on the office to their successors, the bishops, and that's what history says. So what you can infer from passages like Ephesians 4 and 1 Corinthians 12 is that the early church did have apostles, but there's nothing there saying it's going to continue to have apostles. In the case of Mormons, there's also an additional problem, because it also, like Ephesians 4, talks about how, in addition to apostles, and the same thing could apply to oneness Pentecostals, but in Ephesians 4:11 it says that God's gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. Well, okay, notice that, and the same thing is true in the Corinthian correspondence, but notice that puts prophets in the second place. They're inferior to apostles. But in the Mormon church, and I guess this wouldn't apply to oneness Pentecostals, but in the Mormon church, the prophet is the head of the Mormon church. And so in their construction, it looks like apostles are superior, prophets are superior to apostles, and that's reversed in the New Testament.
Okay. That makes sense, Manny?
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you for the call and for the question. Ryan in Midland, Texas, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Welcome back, Ryan. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
All right, Jimmy, I actually have a two-part question for you, if you can get to the first one before the second.
What is the question?
The first one is, okay, when the Pope issued faculties to SSPX priests to hear confessions and to administer marriage when the Year of Mercy began, how can he do that if the SSPX isn't directly under Vatican jurisdiction?
Well, so they are under Vatican jurisdiction because the Pope has universal jurisdiction in the church, and the Society of St. Pius X is part of the church. They used to be in schism, but they're not anymore. And we know that because they had their excommunications lifted. And the only way you can lift an excommunication for schism is if the person is no longer in schism, because schism incurs automatic excommunication. So if you lifted it and they're still in schism, it is automatically reimposed. So we have very good reason for saying that the SSPX is not in schism these days. And they would say they were never in schism, but nevertheless, from a standard Catholic point of view, we've got good evidence they're not in schism, and the Pope has jurisdiction over them. He's got authority over them, and they acknowledge that. They'll say, "Oh yeah, we're subject to the Pope." They may not obey the Pope in everything. They're running, their own system of chapels that are parallel to parishes, and they are celebrating Mass and so forth in them without permission. And they're doing other things that are irregular or illicit in terms of church law, but they are within the Pope's jurisdiction, as they themselves would acknowledge, and he chose to extend this to them at these two things to them as a sign of goodwill to make it easier for them to minister to people in the relevant circumstances.
Okay, Ryan?
All right. Part two is this. Since attending SSPX masses is permissible in certain circumstances, would the same also apply to attending mass at Society of St. Pius V Church? Because I've heard it said that there's some doubt pertaining to whether or not they are truly sedevacantist.
Okay.
Well, my understanding is they are sedevacantists, and I would need to see evidence that they're not. But my understanding is they not only are not in communion with Pope Francis, and they're not subject to him, but the same is true for multiple preceding pontiffs. And so, if they are not in subjection to the Roman pontiff, then they are in schism. And even if they're using a form of the liturgy that is itself licit, I can't recommend that people attend a chapel that is in full-on schism. That's spiritually unhealthy, and going to any other legitimate mass would be preferable to that.
Ryan, thank you. You brought us to the break. We'll be right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
We'll be right back with more great answers from Jimmy today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
This is Father Ramil Fajardo. Dear friends, if we understand the power of radio, then we can understand that the gospel can be made very real, very convincing, powerful enough to send shockwaves throughout the whole country and indeed the whole world. Catholic radio is necessary in order that the gospel be sent throughout all the world, and most importantly, a convincing witness of Christ's presence here on earth.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. July is getting nearer to its close, and July is the last month to get the $50 off your conference ticket if you're coming to the conference. So if you're thinking about it, check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com, CatholicAnswersConference.com. Jimmy will be one of the speakers, but there's lots of great speakers coming, and the theme is Learn from Me, the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. It's September 26th through 29th right here in San Diego, CatholicAnswersConference.com. It's Ask Me Anything this hour and next on Catholic Answers Live, and now we go to Gabe in Battleground, Washington, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Gabe, thank you for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question. Are you, Gabe?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Hope you're all doing well.
Well, we're well.
We
It
are,
sounds like
Gabe.
you're maybe.
Gabe, you need to take us off a speakerphone and talk directly into the phone. Never use speakerphone when you're calling a radio show.
Are you with us, Gabe?
Sure. Give me 1 second here.
Okay. All right. It doesn't even sound like speakerphone. It sounds almost like shortwave radio or something. All right, go
my
ahead.
question was, it's kind of hoping you can help me clarify if I'm on the right track, because I'm new to Catholic teaching, well, relatively new. I've been watching several debates, including some of Catholic Answer staff and Carrie Machuda versus Dr. James White, and he seems to bring up the same argument when it comes to the biblical canon and the Apocrypha, or deuterocanon, which is they are not part of what Josephus called made the hands unclean, therefore they are not part of the canon. And he also makes the secondary argument that they were, well, pretty much they were not accepted by the Jews. I had a different question on that. But the question I want to ask, if certain Jews accepted it as part of the canon, this is the second part, that they were not, that these books, that the canon was entrusted to the Jews, wouldn't it make sense that even if not all Jews accepted the Deuterocanon as part of their canon, the fact that they were entrusted, simple fact that certain Jews did receive them, that means that they were entrusted to the Jews. Would that be a legitimate argument or not?
Well, I'm not sure I entirely followed all that, but let me do the best I can with it, and then you tell me if I answered your question. So it seems that you're asking now St. Paul says that in Romans that the oracles of God were entrusted to the Jews, so fair enough. But if there's diversity in the Jewish community regarding what belongs in the canon, then you can't just artificially select one group of Jews and zero in on them and say, therefore, this is the one, when other Jews had other views about what constituted the oracles of God. So, for example, we've got good evidence that the Sadducees did not accept anything beyond the Torah. the first 5 books of the Bible. And you couldn't therefore say, oh, well, since those are the 5 books that all Jews agree belong in Scripture, those must be the only books that belong in Scripture. And so you can't just artificially pick one group of Jews. Now, White is indebted to a particular, and I'm not going to call him Dr. White because his doctorate is fake, but he is indebted to a particular scholar named Beckwith, who has an eccentric view these days that the canon of Scripture was defined in the Jewish community some centuries before the time of Christ. And current scholarship, broadly speaking, indicates that is just not true. There were multiple canonical traditions within first century Judaism. The Sadducees had a different canon than the Pharisees. The Pharisees had a different canon than the Essenes. And they had a different canon that was common in Greek-speaking Judaism, which had the Septuagint. And the authors of the New Testament, they adopt the Septuagint. They quote from it 80 to 90% of the time when they quote the Old Testament, and they allude to things that are in the deuterocanonical books. So the situation is much more complex, and frankly, White is drawn on eccentric and fringe scholarship in this regard. Gabe, since you're here in the United States, why don't we see if we can send you a copy of my book, The Bible is a Catholic Book, where I go through the different canonical traditions that were around in the first century. And they had I should also mention, they had fuzzy boundaries. Like even the Pharisee canon, it was a canonical tradition, not a specific canon, because there were books like Sirach and Ezekiel that continued to be debated for quite a while after the first century. So let's see if we can send you that book, and that should help clarify a few additional things.
That get out what you needed, Gabe?
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, I think you were able to follow my very broken reasoning. But
all right.
Because I actually agree with what you were saying. That was kind of where I was going. Because
Gabe,
he does. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, hang on, and we'll send you the book.
Okay. Oh, actually, you know what? I actually have it as part of my Kindle. I've been reading several books on the subject, which inspired the question. But I appreciate you willing to send it to me. But I think this pretty much makes sense because he keeps reiterating this. Well, for example, with the New Testament argument, well, even if not all Christians knew about the inspired scriptures, they were still inspired scriptures regardless of other people's being aware of them.
Okay.
So I kind of had the same reasoning with the Old Testament canon. Even if other people did not recognize those books as canonical, doesn't mean they weren't canonical, which kind of defeats his argument.
Thanks, Gabe. On we go. Luca is in Ontario, California, watching on YouTube. Luca, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
I wanted to know what are some examples of moral relativism being applied and why and how it fails in government.
In government? Well, okay. I don't normally comment on political matters, but one of the most obvious things to me in terms of certainly recent and current American politics where moral relativism has been applied is on the subject of abortion, where, the argument is, well, you may believe that abortion is wrong, but I don't, and therefore I should be able to have abortion or have my girlfriend or my wife have an abortion. And so that's a form of moral relativism. And it fails. It fails morally because it involves murder. It involves the deliberate killing of an innocent human being, and that cannot be morally justified. They may think it can be morally justified, but they're wrong. It also fails practically because one of the things, there's a saying that demography is destiny. If you don't reproduce yourself, you're ultimately going to collapse as a society. And Americans, regrettably, have been reproducing at less than the replacement rate, which is 2.1 children on average per woman. And we've been able to buy some time by offsetting that with immigration. But the truth is, unless we start reproducing at 2.1 children per woman, we're going to eventually have a societal collapse and following a demographic winter. And if given that about a third of pregnancies are aborted, at least that's been the case. It's been around a third over the history of abortion in America since Roe v. Wade. We would be in a positive situation if we were reproducing, if we did not have abortion. We would be demographically positive rather than demographically negative. And so I would cite abortion as an obvious example of moral relativism that fails as a policy.
Luca, thank you. Thanks for the question. I don't know if you have Carlo's book on relativism. Carlo Broussard wrote a book on the new relativism here. It may be slightly tangential to your question, but if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just hang on, and Edgar will get your address and send it to you. The new relativism. Martin in Connecticut, you are up next. Martin, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. My question is in regard to the automatic excommunications of apostasy and heresy. Does that encompass consented to doubts or denials in the mind, which one does not persist in? And if it makes any difference if one let somebody else know whether or not they had those doubts or denials of the mind?
Okay, so in regard to the first question, what it involves is voluntary doubts or denials. So it's not the same as having a difficulty or feeling, I don't know if this is true. It's willing, I refuse to assent to this, or I refuse to make a decision about it. And then it only applies to things that are dogmas. So that's what a dogma is. It's a proposition that the church has infallibly defined to be divinely revealed. So it's not even all infallible teachings. It's a subset of infallible teachings, which the church has infallibly defined to be divinely revealed. If one doubts or denies a non-infallible teaching, then there is no excommunication. Even if one doubts or denies an infallible teaching that's not a dogma, there is no excommunication. The excommunication only applies to heresy, which is the willful doubt or denial of a dogma. And so that's where someone says, I just refuse to accept this. Either I outright deny it or I refuse to make up my mind about it. But if you say, I believe what the church teaches, and even though I feel very uncertain here, or I have emotional doubts or something like that, that's not the same thing. It is not a voluntary doubt. But let's suppose a person has a voluntary doubt, either regarding a specific dogma or the whole of Christian dogmas. So one would say, I'm no longer a Christian, which is what apostasy is. It's not apostasy unless you reject the entirety of the Christian faith. Okay, suppose someone has voluntary doubts in that regard, but you never express it to anybody. Does the excommunication still apply? The answer is no. One of the things that the Code of Canon Law provides for is that in order for the excommunication to be triggered, it must be publicly verifiable. Someone else must have heard or known that you were entertaining this willful doubt. And so if you keep it to yourself, there is no excommunication.
Could I have a slight follow-up question?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
If one, say, had those type of things and they didn't let anybody know, but they didn't persist in it in any way, and then later on they said, oh, I had this period in my life where I had that, would that count as like a manifestation of it, or is that just something in the past because they didn't persist in it?
It's if you no longer have such a doubt and you admit to having one in the past, that does not trigger the excommunication. That would be something in the past. You at one point had a doubt and you had this period in your life, and if at that time you had manifested it to someone else, then it could trigger the excommunication, although even then there's a bunch of exceptions, which we haven't even gone into. But if it's over and done and you later say, I went through this phase, that does not trigger the excommunication. It has to be manifested to someone while the voluntary doubt is still present.
Well, thank you very much for that clarification.
No problem.
Well, thank you, Martin, for the call. Hey, if Catholic Answers Live has been positive in your life or someone else's life, and you'd like to share your testimonial of what it meant, we'd like to invite you to visit CatholicAnswersLive.com. Click the red testimonial button. You can leave an audio or video testimonial. They're very helpful to us. They mean a great deal to us, and we'd be grateful if you'd give it try CatholicAnswersLive.com, click the red testimonial button, and leave your testimonial. We'll continue in just a minute with more Jimmy Akin, Ask Me Anything, on Catholic Answers Live. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic, and Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Is orthodoxy an alternative to the Catholic Church? In a time of uncertainty for many Catholics, orthodoxy can look like greener pastures. Answering Orthodoxy, the new book from Catholic Answers Press, explains why Catholics who are thinking of leaving need to think twice. There are important reasons to remain in the Catholic Church and convincing answers to Orthodox claims. Order your copy of Answering Orthodoxy today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Is the Catholic faith still a rock amidst the waves of history? Why does it so often seem to be a mess? In his latest book, Confusion in the Kingdom, best-selling author Trent Horn helps you to get to the roots of the present chaos, explaining the destabilizing movements within Catholicism and exposing the harm and scandal progressive Catholicism has caused. Order your copy of Confusion in the Kingdom today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Monthly Giving Club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Matt Swaim here. Tomorrow on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll celebrate the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, the grandparents of Jesus. Plus news, weather, sports, and more. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. All the lines are full, and it's an Ask Me Anything. I want to get to the next call kind of quickly because it's Martin in France. We don't get a lot of calls from France. Martin, are you there with us?
Yes, hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you for doing well. Thank you very much for taking my call. So my
Bonjour,
question
Martin.
is to... pardon?
Bonjour.
Pardon?
Bonjour.
Okay. My question regards, I am a frequent listener of your show, and lately Mr. Akin exposed what I would call a new concept of purgatory, defined by the Catechism of 1984 and by Benedict XVI, allegedly, where it is no longer about expiating temporal punishment, but only about detaching oneself from sin, from sinful attachments. And to me, it's a puzzle how that could be reconciled with former, more authoritative teaching. Let me just quote Indulgentiarum Doctrina by St. Paul VI. So to me, that sounds very, very authoritative as a formulation, because it states it is a divinely revealed truth. That sounds almost like a definitive statement, that sins bring punishment inflicted by God's sanctity and justice. These must be expiated either on this earth through the sorrows, miseries, and calamities of this life, and above all through death, or else in the life beyond through fire and torments or purifying punishments. Similarly, something that is very dear to me are putative indulgences, that is, indulgences on behalf of souls of the purgatory. I try to get one almost every day for a soul in purgatory, and I simply don't understand how, if purgation depends solely on the purgated soul's own spiritual path of detachment from sin, not on it having a debt in terms of temporal punishment, what then putative indulgences would be for. I think you would not argue that plenary indulgences override a soul's free will in terms of attachment to sin. And the third argument is the Decree on Justification, chapter 14 of the Council of Trent, which states which is, as far as I know, a definitive teaching, as all decrees of the Decree on Justification. Hence, it must be taught that the repentance of a Christian after his fall is very different from that at his baptism, and that it includes satisfaction by fast, alms, prayers, and all the devout exercises of the spiritual life for the temporal punishment, as the sacred writing speech is not always wholly remitted as it is done in baptism to those who have grieved the Holy Spirit. So here we have a repentance implied not only as purely spiritual.
Martin, I don't have time, I'm afraid, in a radio answer to respond to a dissertation. You've already laid out 3 arguments. Let me respond to them, okay?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. So in regard to your first argument, doctrinal development is what's responsible here. And what doctrinal development does is it refines things that were already present. So there can be a way of understanding and articulating a teaching in one age, and then the church can continue to reflect on that and offer a more precise formulation. And so in the past, you did have documents like Indulgentiarum Doctrina, and that is a fallible document. It is nothing in it uses the language of infallibility. But it does articulate a truth about purgatory in terms of punishment. And what happened is concurrent with and subsequent with Indulgentiarum Doctrina, which came out in the 1960s, theologians continue, including Joseph Ratzinger, continue to reflect on, okay, so what's the nature of these punishments? And if you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it doesn't say that these punishments don't exist. What it says is what they are, what they do, is they free us from disordered desires. And so that's a refinement of an understanding of what they are. It also says that it's completely different than the punishment of the damned, and that it doesn't involve the infliction of pain externally, but flows from the very nature of attachment to sin. And so this is genuinely a refinement. One mistake that a lot of people make when they read past documents and when a doctrinal development has happened and they compare it to something today is they try to play, what's the best way to explain it? They kind of play a Trump game. And I don't mean former President Trump. I mean, one document trumps another. And so you'll look at some older document and say, well, this is authoritative. And so that allows me to ignore the doctrinal development that has occurred until such time as I see it in a comparable document. And that is not how this works. You have to read all of the documents of the magisterium in continuity with each other. You can't ignore certain documents because they are of lesser gravity. Also, I would argue Catechism of the Catholic Church, that's pretty darn grave. I mean, it's only the second of 2 worldwide catechisms, and it's the current one, which means it reflects doctrinal development that's happened since the time of, well, let's say the Council of Trent. And I'll come back to Trent in a second. Your second argument was about applying indulgences to someone who's passed on. Well, okay, number one, just so you're aware, the church has always held that we can only apply indulgences to souls in purgatory by way of prayer, because the church in purgatory, the church suffering, is not under the jurisdiction of the Pope. The Pope has authority over the church militant, and he can exercise the power of the keys over the church militant, but he can't, by his earthly jurisdiction, directly affect souls in purgatory. So what the church does in those cases is it prays for the souls in purgatory, and it asks God via someone on earth gaining an indulgence to help that person in purgatory. And that's totally consistent with this articulation of how purgatory works. Pope Benedict even notes that. In Spes Salvi, he talks about how we are not completely separated from the souls in purgatory, and we can intervene. It's not a matter of overriding their free will, because they already want to be purified of their disordered desires. If they died in God's friendship, their will is fixed on good, and those disordered desires are now being purified. And if we obtain an indulgence here on earth, God can apply it to them. So those two are not in conflict with each other. The third passage you cite was from one of the chapters in the Council of Trent, and you were quoting from the Decree on Justification. The Decree on Justification, though, is not the Council of Trent's Decree on Purgatory. There's a separate decree on purgatory, and it's articulating a truth. Now, the first thing I should mention is the chapters in Trent, they are not infallible. What can be infallible in Trent is the canons. The canons where they say things like, if anyone says X, let him be anathema. Those are infallible. The ecclesiastical penalty of anathema no longer exists, but this was the highest form of discipline in the church at the time. And so when a canon deals with a doctrinal matter, it does trigger infallibility. With the chapters in Trent, though, they are not infallible. They are authoritative, but they are not infallible. And the chapter that you're quoting basically says that that when a person commits a sin and they're forgiven its eternal debt, there can remain some ongoing consequences, and that need to be dealt with. And that's true. All that the church has done in the catechism is refine how those consequences are dealt with. It doesn't deny the existence of so-called temporal punishments. It just further clarifies the nature of the temporal punishments. What they do is they remove our disordered desires, and they are different than the suffering of the damned, and that they flow from the nature of sin itself rather than being a kind of punishment inflicted from without.
Martin, I'm very grateful for your call. It is very nice to get a call from France. I got to go to the break now, and that was already a lot. So, but maybe as you come up with follow-up questions, if you want to call back, we can have more discussions. But off to the break we go. We'll be right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hosting Women Made New has helped me deepen my own faith, and I look forward to every weekend having those in-depth discussions with my guests. It's been such a blessing being a part of the EWTN family and carry on the mission that Mother Angelica started.
Women Made New, Saturday noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's our guest. It's Ask Me Anything. Lines continue full. So back to the phones we go. Fabian's in Texas watching on Facebook. Fabian, welcome. You got a question for Jimmy Akin?
Yes, I do. First of all, thank you because he gave me the suggestion to read the catechism, and I found one of my first answers within paragraph 25 of the prologue. So thank you for that.
Yay! Very good.
My question is over the sacrament of marriage, just how and what makes it a sacrament. I don't know that, and I just want to know about it. And if you could suggest a resource like you did with the catechism.
If I could suggest a resource that what about the catechism?
Oh, no. After your brief summary over the sacrament of marriage, just anything that could maybe a resource that I can look into later on. Because right now I'm still on the catechism. I am nowhere near even the first chapter of it. But if you can give me a resource afterwards just to go over the sacrament of marriage later on, that'd be great.
I got it. Okay, so all marriage, both sacramental and natural, marriage is a partnership of the whole of life directed towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. That's what a marriage is. Among baptized people, marriage has been elevated to the dignity of a sacrament. And because it's a sacrament, it communicates God's grace to the recipients so that they are better able to live the Christian life and follow God. And it also is, if it's a consummated sacramental marriage, it also becomes indissoluble. So nothing but death can dissolve it. So that's a basic look at the difference between a sacramental marriage and a natural marriage. For more about marriage, I'll point you right back to the catechism, because you've already got a good, simple, if you have the catechism, you've got a good, simple presentation of all of the basic facts about marriage. There are other works that go into more detail, but as a starting point to understand the sacrament of marriage, read the section on the catechism that covers it. It's in part 2 of the catechism on celebrating the Christian mystery, because marriage is one of the 7 sacraments, so you want to read that section. And it also comes up in the 3rd section of the catechism on the Christian moral life, because thou shalt not commit adultery is one of the 10 commandments. And so you can look up the 6th commandment and read some more about sexual ethics, including how they interact with marriage.
Okay, Fabian.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that. I will be looking forward to getting more into this catechism. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Fabian. Jamie's in Boston, Massachusetts, listening on Catholic.com. Hello, Jamie. You got a question for Jimmy?
Hi. How are you guys doing?
Really good. Nice to speak with you again.
You too. It's good to interact again. My question is, so I am struggling to understand the Eucharist, especially Eucharistic adoration. When I adore the Eucharist, who/what exactly am I adoring? I keep reading about these miracles that are like, it's like his heart tissue is there, but I also hear that it is him fully, like the Eucharist is him entirely, but then I also hear that it's him on the cross. So what exactly? Like, and
All right.
what exactly is going on there?
Okay, Jamie, thank you.
Okay, so Christ is present in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So the entire Christ is there. Now, the appearances, or they're sometimes called accidents, but the appearances of bread are attached primarily to his body, but his blood, soul, and divinity are also present. And in the same way, the accidents or appearances of wine cover his blood, but his body, soul, and divinity are also present. So you're adoring the entire Christ. In terms of this business about you're adoring Jesus on the cross, well, if that's your intent, then that's what you're doing. But that's doesn't reflect what's objectively happening in front of you. Because even though you hear people sometimes advocating this time travel theory of the Eucharist, and believe me, I'm a big fan of time travel. I'm all for time travel. But to be honest, the concept of time travel was not present in historic Christian thought prior to the 1900s. I'm sorry, the 1800s. And the early Christians did not understand the Eucharist to be a time warp back to the cross. This is a misunderstanding based on later church teaching. At the Council of Trent, for example, it was taught that the sacrifice of the Mass and the sacrifice of the cross are the same sacrifice in the following sense. And this is where this time travel nonsense gets introduced. Because what happens is people hear sacrifice of the Mass is the same as the sacrifice of the cross, and they forget what follows. They just treat it as if that's an absolute statement, and it's not. What the Council of Trent said was that the sacrifice of the Mass and the sacrifice of the cross are the same sacrifice in that the primary sacrifice and priest is the same, meaning Jesus, and the offering is the same, meaning Jesus, and the purpose is the same, meaning our salvation. But they are different sacrifices in other senses. And one of them, the council notes, is the manner of the sacrifice. Christ was offered in a bloody manner on the cross, so he suffered and died. But he is not being offered in a bloody manner in the Mass. He's not suffering and dying in the Mass. Therefore, no time warp. And also this gets aided, this understanding gets exacerbated by the fact that we know in his divine nature, God is outside of time. And that's true. But Jesus's human nature, which is what's involved here, that's inside of time. And the concept of time travel does not apply to Jesus's human nature, at least not unless you get a time machine involved. And there is no time machine here. For further confirmation of this, I would point folks towards the 1968 Credo of the People of God, which was promulgated by St. Paul VI. It's basically kind of an expanded creed. And one of the things it confesses is that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ enthroned now in heaven. So what's in front of you in the Eucharist is not AD 33. It's not Jesus in AD 33. It's Jesus right now in heaven. So you're adoring the entire Jesus. And unless you change your intention to cast your intention back to AD 33, you are adoring Jesus as he is right now in heaven and on the altar.
Jamie, I want to come back to you and see if that answer was satisfying for you. Does that work? Do you understand?
That was actually extremely helpful because my intuition was always just worshiping Jesus in heaven, but then when I started hearing that it was time travel, I was like, I don't know if I believe that. So this is super encouraging. Thanks for your ministry.
Thanks, Jamie. Boy, we rarely hear Jimmy talk anyone out of time travel, but in this case, it needed to be done.
I'm a big fan of time travel. It's just I'm not going to apply it where the evidence is not in its favor.
It's always pleasant to talk with you, Jamie. Thank you very much for the call. Got to go to get to go to Green Bay, Wisconsin now. Mike is in Green Bay watching on YouTube. Mike, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Gentlemen, long time no listen. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Mike.
Good. My question revolves around two separate things. One, Our Lady of Champion and Lady Adele, who was able to witness the apparition of Mary here. And then Jimmy's current discussion on Mysterious World about the changes the Vatican has implemented in assigning a supernatural cause for things. And I guess I'm wondering how those new set of rules would apply to determining miracles in the case of someone like Adele, who is up for canonization now.
Okay, so if that's your question, they really don't. The new rules for discernment don't really deal with the kind of miracles that are dealt with in saint canonizations. What the rules are meant for is guiding the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith in helping bishops discern these things. And the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith doesn't really deal with saint canonizations, and therefore it doesn't really deal with the miracles that are used to support those. Those are done by a different dicastery, the dicastery for the causes of saints. And so they have their own procedures for evaluating miracles, and it's typically a twofold process. I mean, it's always a twofold process, or basically always. If it's a medical miracle, which it almost always is these days, although historically there were some others, but these days it's basically always a medical miracle. The first thing they do is they have a team of medical specialists known as the Consulta Medica that involves experts on medical matters, and they don't even have to be Catholic. They don't care what your religion is. They care, are you a medical expert? And they ask a group of medical experts, is there any scientific explanation for this healing? And if the Consulta Medica comes back and says, nope, there's no scientific explanation, then they turn it over to a team of theologians to see whether it can be reasonably understood as due to the intercession of a proposed saint. So all that's going on over in the dicastery for the causes of saints. The miracles or other supernatural events besides apparitions that the new norms deal with are principally other miracles that aren't associated with the saint's intercession, like Eucharistic miracles, for example, or statues that weep, or things like that. So it's a different process for a different kind of miracle.
Mike, thanks. I'm going to try to get one more question in before we have to go. Mark is in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, watching on YouTube. Mark, I'd like to get you an answer from Jimmy, but you got to be quick with the question.
All right. Question about Marian apparitions. You have Our Lady of Akita, Japan, Guadalupe in Mexico, Cabello in Africa. They all look different from each other, each resembling nations that they appear to. How can we have all these different Our Ladies when there is only one Saint Mary during all these apparitions that have been approved by the church? Is it the same lady appearing in all these different events?
Okay.
Thanks, so the basic answer is going to be yeah. Now, one of the things, and this goes back, for example, to Cardinal Prospero Lambertini back in the 1700s, who was later elected Pope Benedict XIV. He wrote the classic book on this, and he pointed out that there was a controversy at the time about some seers see Jesus crucified with 3 nails, some see him crucified with 4. Which vision should we trust? And he said, it doesn't matter. The point of God giving someone a vision of Jesus on the cross is not to teach us about the number of nails. It's to help us grow closer to Jesus. And in the case of a Marian apparition, it's to help us appreciate Mary and grow closer to Jesus. It's not to teach us about what would she look like if you had a photograph of her. And consequently, the consciousness of the seer will fill in these subsidiary details, like how many nails do they see Jesus crucified with? How does Mary appear? What does she look like? What clothes is she wearing? And it's been observed that she often appears as if she were a member of the local culture. And that's not surprising because it's a way of communicating her closeness to the local culture and her love for the people of the local culture and her maternal care for the people of the local culture.
Mark, thank you for being quick with that question. You can hear the music. That means we have come to the end of this hour, but we've got Jimmy for another hour. We'll continue with Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, having a good Thursday afternoon. Thanks for being here with us. It's fun on Thursday afternoons. You never know that some groovy music will pop up, and Jimmy Akin's here all afternoon, and all the lines stay full. We get interesting calls. So if you want to call, lines do open up. I mean, I made a big deal about the fact that they're full, but they do open up from time to time. So 888-318-7884 is the number to call, 888-318-7884. Ask me anything. You can ask Jimmy whatever you like. 888-318-7884. Jimmy, I'm just going to go right back to the phones. There's a lot of calls. Dave's in Cincinnati, Ohio, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Dave, welcome. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, guys.
Hello.
The Holy Spirit gives us the words, according to the Bible, I do believe. I could be wrong. When we're evangelizing, because doesn't it read in there that you're not supposed to think up the words, the Holy Spirit will give them to you? My question is, why doesn't the Holy Spirit give us the words when we are evangelizing our children?
Okay, so I guess the way to proceed with this is by clarifying what the actual promise is, because it's not when we're evangelizing. We do that all the time. Jesus says not to worry about what we're going to say if we're being persecuted by the authorities, like if we're being put on trial in front of kings or something, or governors or things like that, or even in the synagogue. He says in that situation, the Holy Spirit will give us what we need to deal with the situation, so we don't need to worry about it in advance. And so it's not a general promise for evangelization. There are other passages that talk about evangelization, and they presuppose that we do need to think about what we're doing in evangelization. Like when, for example, St. Peter says to always be ready to give an account of the hope that is in you if someone asks, but do so with gentleness and reverence. And so that implies it's not just the Holy Spirit speaking through us. We do need to think about, how can I deliver this message, and how, because he says always be ready. So that means think about it in advance. And we need to think about, how can I do it with gentleness and reverence rather than, being a jerk. So I would also note that promises of this nature do not apply universally. So there may be situations in which it's God's will, for whatever reason, to allow a person to experience persecution, and that person might not be able to mount an effective defense. But we can infer from this that the Holy Spirit will provide some assistance to us if we're being persecuted, and that we thus should not worry about it excessively. None of this has to do with catechizing our children. And so catechizing our children, we don't have a special promise for, and so we will need to think, just like we need to in ordinary evangelization, we will need to think about what to say to our children and how to say it.
All right, Dave.
Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Love you. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Same to you.
Joseph in Michigan, watching on YouTube. You're up next, Joseph. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Really good. Thank you.
Great. So my question has to do with Bible verses like Romans 8:28 and God working things for greater good and God making all things new. So I understand that in the salvific sense of these situations are for God's glory, our salvation, and others. But speaking in the material sense, for example, someone lost their job because of their own stupidity or mistakes. Does God ever bring a greater good out of that and maybe give them a better job in the future? Or is that more of an opportunity that was once had and lost, and God's only concerned about bringing something out of their salvation from bad circumstance and not necessarily what they lost in the material sense?
Well, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, so this is a subcase of the problem of evil, and I've got talks on the problem of evil that you can look up. But according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, God would not allow any evil. unless he was going to bring about an equal or greater good. And so we can be confident that if something happens, like someone does something stupid at work and gets fired, God only allowed that because he's going to bring about some greater good. But that doesn't tell us what the good is. It could be they're going to get a better job in the future, or it could be something else. It could be something material, like that better job. It could be something spiritual, like losing that job is going to contribute to the person's ultimate salvation. So we have to leave what the greater good is up to God, but we can be confident that there will be at least one greater good, or God would not have allowed the unfortunate thing to happen. One thing, if someone has done something stupid at work and lost the job, one good that certainly can come out of that is we can learn our lesson and not do those stupid things again. And so that of itself is a good. It may not be a greater good than if we had the job, but it's at least a good that will please God if we cooperate with the experience and help and thus learn our lesson. That itself will be pleasing to God, even if he allowed us to lose the job for some other reason and is going to bring some other good out of it.
Okay, Joseph?
Yeah, so will there always be a greater good, though, in the end? Or will it just always be at least a good, but it can be a lesser good?
No, it will always be equal or greater.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
It will never be lesser.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for the call. Hayden is in Castroville, Texas, listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Hayden, welcome. Go ahead with your question.
Howdy, Si. Howdy, Jimmy.
Hi, Hayden.
Howdy.
I was going to ask a couple questions on Eucharistic miracles about when the accidents change into actual flesh and blood. First being, what do we do when that happens? Do we still consume the Eucharist, or do we not? Trying to avoid cannibalism. And then the second thing being, would that accident change that has happened in Eucharistic miracles contradict St. Augustine in any way on his views on the Eucharist?
Okay, so in regard to the first question, it involves a judgment call. Now, cannibalism is not, or the consumption of human flesh, is not intrinsically evil. It's undesirable, but it's just flesh and blood. It's like it has a different genetic code than the flesh of a cow or the blood of a cow, but it's still eating meat and consuming blood, which is not intrinsically wrong. Otherwise, all those British blood sausages would be right out, and the church has never understood that to be the case. Consumption of blood was forbidden for Jews, but it's not for Gentiles. So ordinarily, for cannibalism to occur, it involves disrespect for the dead, and it could hypothetically be justified in emergency circumstances, like if your plane is crashed in the Andes and you have no food except the bodies of your fellow passengers who have died, and you've got to eat to survive. That's understandable. It's undesirable, but you're not being disrespectful of the dead if you have no alternative. Well, you're also not being disrespectful of the dead if Jesus miraculously makes his body and blood appear in your mouth, because number one, he's the one that's doing that, and number two, he's not dead. And so you wouldn't be disrespecting him if you consumed what he himself had done in the situation. So there's a judgment call, and it can go either way. If you've already got the host in your mouth and it suddenly becomes flesh, or you bite it and there's suddenly blood in your mouth, you didn't bite yourself, you bit the host and all of a sudden there's blood in your mouth. Well, in that last case, it's pretty obvious you need to swallow it because you don't have a good way to store it. If it became flesh in your mouth, you hypothetically could take it out of your mouth and preserve it, but you may not be quick enough on your feet, thinking about it to do that, and so you may consume it anyway. And there's nothing wrong with that. If Jesus didn't want you to consume it for sure, he just absolutely was opposed to that, then he wouldn't have done it in your mouth. when you don't have a chance to think about it. On the other hand, if it's in a situation where it doesn't happen in your mouth, or you have time to think about it, and what do I want to do, then it can be perfectly fine also to preserve the transformed elements and allow them to be investigated by science as a potential Eucharistic miracle. So that's what I'd have to say about your first question. Regarding your second question, I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of St. Augustine. Is there a particular thing that he says that's making you wonder?
Not in particular, but and I don't know Augustine. I can't say I know Augustine very well, but I did. It was in responding to a Protestant, just online conversation, of course, and he was saying that if Eucharistic miracles do happen and accidents do in fact change, then that in some way would contradict Augustine's views on the Eucharist. And I know we all know that Augustine believed in transubstantiation, but I was just wondering if there were any grounds to that claim that you would possibly know.
I'd have to know what he's thinking of. I can guess what he may be thinking of, because Augustine does sometimes use the language of symbol when he's talking about the consecrated elements. But as patristic scholars like the Protestant scholar J.N.D. Kelly noted in his book Early Christian Doctrines, St. Augustine also uses realist language, and the concept of symbol in the early church is different than what we think of as a symbol. To us today, a symbol of something is something that is not the same but just represents something else. But in the ancient world, among the early church fathers, the concept of symbol referred to something that made present or made actual the thing signified. And so for Augustine, it is a symbol, but it's a symbol in the sense of it makes Christ's body and blood really present. And that's why he also uses realist language. Unfortunately, that distinction is not grasped by Protestants who have a low view of the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And so that might be what your friend's thinking about, but I would have to know more about his claim in order to be able to interact with it. But that would be my first guess, especially if he's coming from like a Baptist background or a Pentecostal background or one of the other churches that tends to disbelieve in the real presence.
I'm going to leave it there, Hayden, because we have to take a break. Right back with more Jimmy Akin, Ask Me Anything on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Are you a new listener to EWTN Radio? Welcome. We're here for you 24/7.
You'll hear live and interactive shows throughout the day to answer any questions you may have about the Catholic faith.
There's trustworthy news from a Catholic perspective.
And a large selection of podcasts available at EWTN's Podcast Central.
And, of course, the daily Mass, prayers, and everything you need to edify your soul.
Welcome to EWTN Radio. We're blessed to have you with us.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and Dana in Orange County is next, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Dana, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, so my understanding of church teaching is that marriage is for the purpose of bringing a husband and wife together, and creating children in a family. But when I read Matthew 19, 1 Corinthians 7, it seems that Jesus and Paul are teaching that the purpose of marriage is to accommodate people who cannot control their sexual lust. And Jesus, even in Luke chapter 18, seems to kind of reward people who leave their wife and children. And so I was wondering what Jimmy's comments were on my kind of, it seems that there's a conflict between what the church teaches and what Jesus and Paul were teaching about marriage.
Okay, what did you say about, and it's hard to tell because it sounds like you're on a speakerphone, so please don't use speakerphones when you call radio shows. But it sounds like you said someone was encouraging someone to leave their wife and children. What was that?
In Luke chapter 18, it does seem that Jesus is rewarding people who leave their wife and children. The story of the rich man and the kingdom of God, as well as the parable of the tenant, seems to indicate that Jesus was, at least indicating that there was a reward. Peter also mentions, hey, we've left everything. We've left our families. And Jesus promises them to be rewarded in heaven. That he does this on multiple occasions, and that his teachings on marriage
I got it. So let's deal with that first. Jesus does not encourage people to violate their marital obligations, but there are situations in which someone is determined to follow Jesus, and that may mean, like with the case of the apostles, like with Peter and the others, it may mean a temporary separation from their family. It's not that they're abandoning them. They've just got a job that's going to take them away for a while. There are also other cases where people are determined to follow Jesus and their spouse rejects them, or makes it impossible to live together because of how opposed they are to Jesus. And if you and that incurs suffering on the part of the person, as does separation from one's family. If one suffers on account of Christ, that will be rewarded, but that doesn't mean Jesus is encouraging people to leave their families. It's either a temporary absence, or if it's a permanent absence, it's an undesired permanent absence that the person undertakes anyway for purposes of following Jesus. In terms of marriage, I gave the definition of marriage earlier in the show. Marriage is a partnership of the whole of life for the purposes of the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. So that's right out of the Code of Canon Law. That's the church's understanding of marriage and its purposes. So it is not the case that the church teaches that marriage is only for having kids. It's also for the good of the spouses. And avoiding, grave lust, well, that's good. And so if a person would otherwise be subject to grave lust, absolutely they can get married. Jesus indicates that celibacy is not for everyone. It's only for certain people who have a special gift. Then St. Paul similarly indicates that if someone would otherwise have grave lust, then they can absolutely get married. And the church agrees with that. That's part of the good of the spouses clause. So they actually all cohere with each other.
It does seem to me that 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is in conflict with that. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. It does seem that Paul is emphasizing that if you cannot control your sexual lust, you should get married.
That's what he is saying. That's what it means to burn with passion. If you're otherwise going to have a lot of lust, then absolutely get married. And St. Paul indicates in the same passage, because if you read the whole chapter, you'll find him saying things like, it is not a sin to get married. He gives a specific reason. He gives two reasons why he prefers or recommends celibacy. The first one is because you're allowed to be undivided in your attentions, because you can focus exclusively on pleasing Jesus, whereas you'll have divided attentions if you have a spouse you've also got to please. And the second is because he says the world in its present form is passing away. And so there was a shift in the world going on at the time that he believed warranted of avoiding marriage in order to have undivided attentions, if that's your gift. But if it's not your gift, Paul is totally in favor of getting married. He says it is better than to marry than to burn, which means burn with passion in context or suffer intense lust. It's better to get married than have that. So he and the church are in agreement on this.
Thank you, Dana. On we go. Again, all the lines full still. Sophia is in Minnesota, listening on our website, Catholic.com. Sophia, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you very much. I've been thinking a lot about apostolic succession, and a lot of the defense for apostolic succession comes from the writings of the church fathers, which makes a lot of sense. But I was kind of wondering if there is like an actual line kind of recorded somewhere, and if there isn't, are there like fragments of that line recorded somewhere?
Mm-hmm. So to my knowledge, there is not a single comprehensive list mapping all of the world's bishops all the way back to the apostles. There is, and this is easily available on a website. I believe the website is catholicclergy.com, although I could be mistaken about that. But there is a registry within the Catholic Church that traces the lineage of all current bishops back several hundred years. And I know that before that, we also have other indicators of which bishop ordained who as another bishop, but it's not a complete list. Also, the process has fail-safes built into it. So it's not just one bishop lays hands on you if you're going to be consecrated a bishop. It's typically at least 3. So even if there was a danger that one bishop might have been invalidly ordained, the other 2 bishops putting hands on you will secure your ordination as a bishop. And so even though we don't have, to my knowledge, a list going all the way back to the apostles for every single bishop, it is morally certain that that we do have lines that go all the way back to the apostles. The problem is we just don't have good records in the earliest history of the church. The amount of surviving literature from like the 2nd century is very sparse. A lot of it didn't get written down, and a lot of it that did get written down has not survived the ages. But even then, we do have records of like principal sees, where like for the Bishop of Rome, this guy succeeded this guy who succeeded this guy. And so we do have records from that time, and they indicate the substantial integrity of the lines of apostolic succession.
Okay. So just so that I understand, I might be repeating what you just said, but I just want to make sure I understand that there's going to be like little snapshots of the apostolic line, like we'll find little snapshots that we uncover, but we just don't have it just because it was so long ago, basically.
Yeah, and then after a certain point in history, like no later than the 15 or 1600s, we've got the entirety of it for all the lines of bishops.
Okay, and so the defense of the earliest of the line, especially in the early church, will be from like how our knowledge of how the practice of ordination is, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do have records of them talking about ordination and saying this is what we do and this is how we do it, and it goes back to the apostles. We just don't have all the links in the chain documented, but we have them saying this is what's going on, and it goes back to the apostles.
Sophia, thank you. I appreciate that call and the question. I'm going to continue on. Ryan is in Arkansas watching on YouTube. Ryan, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy, you've been a big part in me converting to Catholicism, so I just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. It's my honor.
Yeah. My question pertains to angels and demons. And I just read your article, and if I understood it correctly, it's basically that the term angel just applied to the lower tier spirits, and that the other spirits were the cherubim and seraphim and stuff like that. And so my question is, I got two questions. One of them is, what type of angel was Michael? And then the other one is, when the spirits rebelled, and they're now demons, did they carry over their rank as angels? And if so, like what ranks are they? And are there any specific ones that are more powerful than others, kind of like Michael?
Okay, so I'm going to have to answer this on the other side of the break because we're coming right up to the hard break. Basically, you will find in Christian history various different attempts to give a hierarchy of the different so-called choirs of angels, but those need to be looked at with some suspicion. As St. John Paul II indicated, the church has never signed off on any of those as this is definitely true. So what I'll do when we come back from the break is I'll tell you what a look at the biblical data will suggest.
Thank you, Ryan. Hang on. We'll be right back and get you that answer after this on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Garendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Check, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast to visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today.
Matt Sweem here. Tomorrow on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll celebrate the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, the grandparents of Jesus. Plus news, weather, sports, and more. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
There's the groovy music. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Ask Me Anything this hour on Catholic Answers Live. And there's a lot of people who have taken us up on the offer to call in and get your question answered. Right now, we have Ryan on the line in Arkansas, whose question was about the ranking of angels and demons. And I didn't leave you any time to answer it, Jimmy, so here you go.
That's okay. So I've talked about this periodically, and I don't yet have an episode of Mysterious World on angels in general, although that's planned. But I've talked about it in some recent episodes, like on the Book of Jubilees and on I got a couple episodes on the Book of Enoch coming out, but especially in episode 325 that's coming up on guardian angels, I talk about this. One of the things we find when we study the biblical data on angels is in what we think of as an angel, which is any non-human spirit is an angel, any created non-human spirit. So, well, God is not a human spirit, but he's not created. So any created non-human spirit is an angel the way we use the term today. But that is not the way it's used in the Bible. In the Bible, there are multiple different categories for created non-human spirits. The highest of them in the Old Testament are called sons of God. And we see them, for example, in the beginning of the book of Job. where God comes into his throne room and the sons of God come with him. They're also, and they later seem to be called princes. We see that, for example, in the book of Daniel. The word that it's translated princes much of the time, it can also mean commander. The word is sar. And so sarim would be the angelic princes or commanders, and they seem to be identified with the sons of God. Then there are the seraphim that Isaiah sees, and they're functioning as throne guardians. And people talked about this in an episode of Mysterious World on flying snakes, but the seraphim, or seraphim in Hebrew, actually seem to be snake angels. They are like big, scary throne guardian snake angels that'll get you if you try to without authorization approach God's throne. Ezekiel, though, sees other throne guardians, the cherubim or kruvim. And so we've got God, we've got the sons of God who are like the princes, we've got the throne guardians, we also have God's army, and so he's got soldiers just like a regular king would, and with chariots and stuff like that. And the commander of the Lord's army even shows up in the book of Joshua at one point. And then we've got the lower down guys who just like run errands. They deliver messages. And those are what the Old Testament calls angels. In Hebrew, the word for messenger is used for basically angels that deliver messages, or these created spiritual beings that are not human that deliver messages. And messengers, if you think about the structure of a heavenly hierarchy, they're low down. They are not soldiers in the army. They are not commanders. They are not princes. They are not sons. They're the bottom. But they show up a lot because they interact with us who are below the heavenly hierarchy. And so they're the ones that we tend to have the most in common, with the most interaction with. And so the term angel became common. And in the Christian era, it began to be applied to the entire created heavenly hierarchy. So that's what we can infer from the text of Scripture. Other rankings, like which group is on top, well, biblically, it's the sons of God. And the seraphim and cherubim, they're lower. They're like throne guardians. What about Michael? Well, Michael in Daniel is identified as one of the princes. He's identified as a Sar, and he's specifically identified as the Sar, or prince or commander, that has charge of Israel. He's Israel's guardian. And if it's correct that the princes are identical with the sons of God, then he would be in that category. He would be what Job calls a son of God. Also, he's described in Daniel as one of the chief princes, so he's one of the highest ranking princes. In the New Testament, he's called an archangel. The term archangel, comes from two Greek roots, arche, which means in this context chief, and angelos, which means messenger. So in the New Testament, we can already see how the shift is happening. It's in process from what used to be called a son of God or a prince is now getting called a high-ranking messenger or a high-ranking angel or archangel. So I would say that you can refer to Michael using a number of different terms, but they converge in meaning towards the same thing. He's one of the highest ranking angels. And in other Second Temple literature, he is given additional classifications. Like in First Enoch, he's considered one of the watchers, one of the angels that never sleeps and, is in God's presence all the time. He's one of the 7 angels that get to always be there. But that's outside of the Bible unless you're an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian.
Now, I want to come back to you, Ryan, because I went to the break before I got an answer for you. So does that all make sense to you, Ryan?
Yes, that's good. Yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Also, Ryan, I'm just curious. You don't have to say if you don't want, but I'm curious what part of the state you're in.
Well, I live in Fort Smith, but I'll actually be moving up to Fayetteville to start college this fall. So I'll be right there with you.
Okay. Well, I hope we can meet in person sometime. Fort Smith,
that'd be
for
awesome.
those who may
Thank
not.
you.
Yeah, Fort Smith, who for those who may not know, is a city that's just south of Fayetteville.
And that's where you are.
Yeah.
Fayetteville. All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate that call. Rebecca's in Louisiana watching on YouTube. Rebecca, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, y'all. I'm calling for Kim. She was in the chat, and she's overseas, so she couldn't call at the moment.
Oh, thank you.
But her question is, sure. Her question is about Revelation 13, the mark of the beast, and she wanted to know, is it a future financial or payment system?
Okay, so I've got an episode of Mysterious World on the Mark of the Beast, and I would suggest that she look that up for a more detailed answer than what I can give you at the moment. But I will give you a basic answer right now. The Mark of the Beast episode is number 138. So if she goes to mysterious.fm/138, she can hear a whole episode about it. The way to proceed in answering this question is by saying, what's the literal sense of the text? That's always the first question when we're trying to figure out what the Bible means. The literal sense of the text is what the author, the human author, intended his audience to understand. And so that means we need to ask, what did John, who saw the revelation, what did he intend his human audience to understand? And that means we need to get into the basic interpretation of how revelation applies to history. There are several different positions on this, and I've written about these. You can go to my personal website, jimmyakin.com. One of them is on the flow of time in Revelation, and I talk about this there, I believe, but I've talked about it other places. One of the common theories you hear today in certain Protestant circles, not all, but in like evangelical circles in Protestantism, is that the book of Revelation primarily applies to the future. Now, everybody agrees the beginning of Revelation, like chapters 1 to 3, that applies to the first century. And everybody also agrees the end of the book of Revelation, where the resurrection of the dead happens, that applies to our future. The question is about that chunk of stuff in the middle. And a position known as futurism, which is common in evangelical circles, says that all applies to the future. That middle section from chapter 4 onward, that's all future. The problem is, one problem is that that John stresses both at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book that the vision reveals what's going to happen soon. And if we jump in chapter 4 of the book to the future, then this vision did not happen soon. Also, we've got another problem, which is, how do we get to the future? Because John writes about his initial vision. He's writing to 7 churches in Asia. He then has messages to deliver to those 7 churches. And then he starts describing the vision at the beginning of chapter 4. So there's no indication in the text that we're moving thousands of years into the future at that point. You need, in order to have a plausible construction of how we get from the first century at the beginning of the book to the future at the end of the book, you need to find a long period of time somewhere in the book. And there is such a place. It's in chapter 20, where we read about the millennium, with 1,000 being a stock number for a long period of time. And a sensible reading of Revelation, given that it starts in our past and we're told it's going to happen soon, is that all that material from chapter 4 up to the beginning of chapter 20, that's all happening in the first century, or at least the first few centuries. And today we're living in the millennium, the long period of time before we get to the resurrection of the dead. This is a position known as preterism. It's also a specific view known as amillennialism. I won't go into what those mean for reasons of time. But if on that understanding, which is the one I would endorse, although there are other views, but I think that best represents the data that we have in Revelation. So what would that tell us about the mark of the beast? Well, the mark of the beast comes up in that middle section between chapter 4 and chapter 19. And that would point to the mark of the beast being some reality that existed either in the first century or the first few centuries. So that's where we should look for its primary literal fulfillment. And it so happens we've got a plausible candidate, because one of the things you learn when you study this section of the book of Revelation is we've got the beast from the sea who rules the world and demands to be worshipped as a god and persecutes Christians. Well, does that sound psychelit like anybody in the first century? Rules the world, demands worship as a god, and persecutes Christians. Can you think of anybody in the first century?
It sounds like to me like Nero.
Well, Nero or the Roman emperors more generally.
Yeah.
And we're told the number of the beast is 666, although in a few manuscripts it's 616. Well, guess what Nero Caesar adds up to in Hebrew and Aramaic? It adds up to 666 if you spell it one way, and it adds up to 616 if you spell it another way. So it looks like people in the first century recognized that the line of Roman emperors, including Nero Caesar, were the beast. And therefore, that would tell us what the mark of the beast is. Now, it's not a physical mark. It's not a payment system. It's a spiritual mark that is the result of being willing to participate in the cult of emperor worship. And so that's why we see it. We see the mark of the beast contrasted at the end of chapter 13 with the mark of Christ at the beginning of chapter 14, where the faithful are sealed with a mark on their foreheads from Christ. There's no chapter division there in the Greek. It's just, here's the mark of the beast and here's the mark of Christ. And these are invisible spiritual marks, as I discuss in episode 138 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So that's what the literal sense of the text is talking about. It's talking about a spiritual mark that is on people because they participate in emperor worship, and that allows them to have social advantages like being able to buy and sell. In fact, there were even requirements at certain points in time that when you go to the market, you need to take some incense and throw it into this pan to worship the genius of the emperor. And if not, you couldn't buy and sell. And so this is what it's literally about. But that doesn't mean there's not a future echo of this that we could still encounter. But if there is a future echo of this, it's not going to simply be a payment system. It's going to be something that involves the equivalent of emperor worship. And, literally bowing down to a human as a god. And then there may be a payment system associated with that. But if you're not bowing down to a human being and worshiping him as a god, you are not participating in the mark of the beast. And so I would say if there is a future echo of this, which we can speculate about, but if there is a future echo of this, it ain't here yet. So that's a brief answer to the question.
Rebecca, thanks for asking the question for Kim, who couldn't call because she was overseas. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, "When we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue." Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Hi, this is Father Mike Schmitz. Please join me for Ascension's Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year here on EWTN Radio. We're going through the entire Bible and the Catechism in 365 days. If you've ever wanted to understand what it means to be Catholic and allow those truths to shape your life, this is for you.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I haven't kept perfect count, but I think Jimmy has answered about 1 million questions. Are we close to 1 million? Yeah, in the neighborhood. But we've still got a whole segment to go. It's Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. Now we go to Gabino in Denver, Colorado, listening on 11:20 a.m. Gabino, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thanks. I've heard Protestants teach that the Catholic Church was founded by Constantine. So I was just wondering, where do they get that from? Where does that teaching come from?
Oh.
Well, basically, and I have to say, not all Protestants teach this. This is a theory that you often hear in fundamentalist circles, but respectable Protestant historians will say, yeah, this is nuts. Constantine did not found the Catholic Church. And I ordinarily hesitate to indulge in psychological explanations of where something came from, but there's just no evidence for this. You look at the Catholic Church at the time. It already existed. It was already called Catholic. The term Catholic was introduced in the late 1st century, and we know that because it was broadly in use at the beginning of the 2nd century. We have numerous church fathers prior to Constantine talking about the Catholic Church. It believed the same things that the church believes today, in, not as developed form, but it believed them. And so there's no shift in terms of of what Catholics fundamentally believed at the time of the Emperor Constantine, and he certainly didn't found the church. It was already in existence, and that's what all the historical evidence indicates. So where did this idea come from? Well, since it totally doesn't correspond to the historical evidence, I have to provide a psychological explanation for it, and there is one. In the 1500s, when the Protestant movement started, Europe was solidly Catholic, and it was believed, that everyone knows the Catholic Church is the bride of Christ. It's the church Christ founded, and you're imperiling your soul if you leave it. And so that would create a ton of cognitive dissonance for people who the Protestant reformers were trying to impose Protestantism on, which is really what happened. It was spread by princes, not by evangelization. The prince would say, "Oh, I'm going to be a Lutheran now," or whatever, and then they'd impose the new faith on the populace that was responsible to them. There, in fact, was a saying about that phenomenon. It was the Latin equivalent of "who rules his religion," and so Protestantism was imposed on various populations by Protestant princes, even though the population had long been Catholic. Well, okay, that's going to terrify people if they know that the Catholic Church is the bride of Christ, and by leaving it, you imperil your salvation. That's going to terrify people. You need some way to overcome that cognitive dissonance. And so rather than portray the Catholic Church as the bride of Christ, as the true church, Protestants said, oh, it's not this good thing that was founded by Christ. It's this horrible, evil thing that, of course, was founded after Christ. So the Catholic Church is not the true church, the bride of Christ. It's the whore of Babylon. And the Pope, he's the Antichrist, even though the way the word Antichrist is used in Scripture, it's a person who denies the incarnation of Christ, and the Pope doesn't do that because his job is to represent Christ. So this idea arose: the Catholic Church must be this evil whore of Babylon that had to be founded after the time of Christ. And then there's a question of, well, okay, so if it's founded after Christ, we need to find a place in history for it to be founded. And so, the reformers wanted to portray the early church as good. So, in the 2nd century, the church was good. In the 3rd century, the church was good. In the 4th century, the church was good. But is there any marker we can use? Well, it's based in Rome. Oh, and the Emperor Constantine was based in Rome until, of course, he moved his capital to Constantinople. But that event where where Constantine tolerated the legalization of the Christian religion, that got seized upon as, oh, Constantine must have founded the Christian church, even though that is totally contrary to all of the historical evidence. And the good news is that these days, this claim, which evidentially is ridiculous, is only found in French circles. And so you may hear people repeating it, but even competent Protestants, including not just historians, but theologians and even Protestant apologists, will admit Constantine did not found the Catholic Church. It was already there.
All right, I'm going to leave that there and keep going. I hope that was helpful to you, Gabino. Sean's in New York, listening on Catholic.com. Sean, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
All right, so if you know in the Bible, Jesus tells the Pharisees, or maybe the Sadducees, one of them, that they were teaching something false, I think, which was that you could stop supporting your parents if you dedicated that support to God. And so it made me wonder, do we believe that there was some level of infallibility in the Old Testament period? And if so, what was it? Because from what I understood, like, the Catholic Church needs to have a line of, the truth can't, like, be made to go astray. You know what I mean?
So, Sean, I'm going to answer your question because we're getting close to the end of the hour. The answer is yes, there was infallibility in the Old Testament, and it manifested in different forms. One of the ways it manifested was through the Urim and Thummim, which were special tools that the high priest had to learn about the will of God. And if God reveals something, it's guaranteed to be true. So there was an infallibility charism associated with the office of high priest. Also, the prophets revealed the will of God. And if God reveals something, it's true. So there was a gift of infallibility associated with the office of prophet. And the Old Testament itself is infallible. So, you know, as Jesus says, the scripture cannot be broken. And so there was infallibility also connected with the scriptures. So there are several different forms of infallibility associated with the Old Testament period. That doesn't mean they were always used, and it doesn't mean they were always listened to, but there were.
Sean, I'm going to leave that there. I'm trying to get everybody in here. Edison's in New York City. Edison, you got to be real quick if you'd like an answer from Jim. Whoops. Is Edison there?
I'll just read Edison's question. It was, how long does purgatory last? And the answer is, it depends on how bad you were. It also depends on whether there's time in purgatory. One of the things we know that at the second coming, people who are in need of purification will be transformed in the twinkling of an eye. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Even if you're a pretty roughed up Christian who needs a lot of purification at the second coming, God can do it in the twinkling of an eye. And Pope Benedict, in his encyclical Spes Salvi, says the duration of purgatory cannot be calculated in earthly time. So it could be understood of as instantaneous. It could be understood of as lengthy. But that's something we'll have to wait till we get there to find out how God does it. But we know it can be instantaneous.
Edison, I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure what happened with the phones there. That was the oddest thing I've ever seen. But Edison, thanks for the question. Thanks everybody who called and asked your questions, even if you called and asked a question for somebody else, as Rebecca did. Jimmy, thank you for 2 very fine hours.
My pleasure, and I thought it was interesting. We had a vicarious phone call there.
But yes. Well, that does it. We got to go. We'll see it. No, is it? I'm so confused at the moment about the clock. That last call got me so confused. All right, now I hear the music, so we are about to be out from here. That's what purgatory is like. That 1 second where you're like, am I supposed to be still talking or not? And then now I've gotten a little bit of my purgatory out of the way. Thanks for those who called. As I said, thank you to Jimmy Akin. If you want to check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, just go to mysterious.fm, or you can find lots of material from Jimmy on his YouTube channel. Just look for Jimmy Akin on the YouTube channel, and that will do it for us. Tomorrow, first hour, Deacon Harold's going to be here. Great. And then we'll have Matthew Bunson, the Church in the News. Dr. Matthew Bunson will be our guest. We'll see you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.